412-6802. The recording was made by Jim Walkinshaw of the Oldsmobile History Center on January 20th, 1989 at Van's home. This is tape number 1 of 1 tape. Van also maintains a home in Michigan at 400 Lakeview Court, apartment 19C, Spring Lake, Michigan 49456. Van's phone there is 616-846-2277. Well, Van, if you could just start with your name and your address and your phone number, if you would.
Okay. This is Seward VanNess, and we're enjoying Fort Myers, Florida. The street address is 7402 Lake Breeze. Our condo number is 22-405. We do have a telephone. Area code is 813-482-6802.
You remember what your zip is here?
33907 is our zip.
Okay.
And for those of you who want to visit us in Michigan, the address is 400 Lakeview Court, number C19, Spring Lake, Michigan, 49456.
Okay.
Give us a call first.
You got a phone up there, Van?
The area code is 616-846-2277.
That's great.
Great for sunshine in both places.
Now, maybe you could just back up to when you started at Oldsmobile. What you started doing, what you were, where you were, and so forth. What was going on?
The year is 1948. After applying for a job in the Ford's plant, I received a call from then Thomas Darton saying they'd started a proposed college graduate and training program. There wasn't a soul in Oldsmobile that knew exactly what they were going to do, but he guaranteed it would be a good program. And so that's how we came to Oldsmobile.
Okay.
After my wife graduated on Wednesday, I graduated on Friday, we got married on Saturday, came to Oldsmobile the following Wednesday, and went to work on Friday.
Wow.
1948.
Busy week. What did he have you doing?
From there, actually I was not assigned to Darton.
All right.
I was assigned to then the Director of Purchases,
All right.
Abe Goodson, in the purchasing department.
Okay.
And I spent a year and a half moving around all the departments, all over the plant, before getting a permanent assignment.
Now, did you stay in?
I was under the direction of the staff head, Abe Goodson.
Abe Goodson all that time?
Wherever he wanted me to put me from 1 week to 4 weeks while I worked.
Okay.
And in some cases they let you work, in some cases you just had to sit and watch. Each one did it differently.
Uh-huh.
And it did give us a tremendous background. Jack Ridenhour was one of them in the program.
All right.
A couple of people in the sales department I've now forgotten. The one that just retired in Jackson, from Jacksonville a couple of years was in there too. Anyhow, that became our form. Then once in purchasing with a permanent assignment, we went like everybody else. We went to work and did our jobs.
What part did you have in the purchasing area?
Okay, it started out in machinery and equipment buying.
All right.
And then we went to steel department.
Okay. This is production steel.
Production steel.
All right.
And then we went into the production parts, back to non-product procurement, and supervisor, then back to purchasing, and then worked our way around to a director of purchases. And then when Bob Truxell left to go to Adelco Moraine, it was then when I became a staff head.
All right.
And
when was that? Remember the
back
dates?
Probably about, no, I really don't.
Okay, well don't feel bad.
I imagine about 1973 maybe.
Okay. Yeah.
So,
And then you retired, when did you retire?
in
By
1980.
1980, okay. So that was kind of the progression that you went through.
And then with Truxell leaving, was, along with the job came the assignment at the Chamber of Commerce.
Oh, okay.
Again, it was an example where Oldsmobile is in there, you know, pitching to help. You know?
Yeah.
And if you did one thing, you had to make a contribution on the outside.
Sure.
And Truxell felt that as long as he had them both, I could have them both.
Okay.
And that's how we grew into it.
Okay.
So,
What, Van, during that, then you watched the purchasing department change from being within to watching it from overhead, so to speak.
mm-hmm.
What kind of happened during that many years of span? What significant changes occurred? Did we change how we did business?
Well, yes. There was one element that crept in. There was a strong ethics program.
All right.
Got started, probably about 1959 when that started.
Okay.
And, you know, it became more and more of a thing.
Yeah.
We also went into a lot of group buying. Instead of buying just for Oldsmobile, you were the source establishment. It was the forerunner of today when just the engineering releases now go, and you buy it based on an engineering release. But we'd establish a source and we were responsible, and then other people would come to us and find out who you bought, or we'd go to them.
Okay.
And now it's become sophisticated with engineering releases and stuff. So that was the forerunner of it.
All right.
And where you bought just for one plant, then all the plants, and then back into it.
Do you remember how many folks were there when you first started?
I'm going to estimate around 60, something like that.
Okay.
And I don't think they have that many now.
Okay.
You know, with computers and filing and consolidations, well, I don't think there's anywhere near that.
Where was your first office?
In the old building.
Building 60?
Building 60.
All right.
And we were on the part over the old administration garage.
Oh, yeah. Right up off the lobby there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cold in the winter and hot in the summer.
Best of both worlds.
So,
okay.
then when we moved to the new building, of course, we had the third floor off the lobby.
Yes.
Which was convenient.
Yes.
And then, so let's see, another thing that changed, I'm trying to think when that was. That had to be about 1970, when they assigned purchasing in with production and traffic.
Okay.
All material began to focus into a head. And Bob Cook was our first staff head for that. That triad of departments.
That bigger group.
And it made a very logical move because you had the whole procurement, material, moving, shipping, all in a head to be responsible.
All the materials handling and all of the internal plant as well as external was inside of that.
Including even the cars, the trucks with all the cars away from that.
Prior to that, those were all separate
They
folks?
were separate, yeah. There was no common head until you got to the general manager.
Oh, really? Okay.
Which, you know, Oldsmobile didn't really make too much difference who you reported to. And, you know, I experienced that with Mooney, and when he died, you know, all the guys didn't make any difference. We just went for the job. You know?
That's right, yeah.
So, but in some divisions, you can see where this could be a problem. And it sort of grew and made logical sense. And probably along with that, purchasing industry-wise became more sophisticated and beginning to earn their spot in the world.
Did the bosses that you worked with over the years, like Abe Goosen, can you share with me some of how they did their business and the kinds of managers they were?
Well, let's see. Abe Goosen was a veteran and did a lot of work himself.
Okay.
Because that was the technique of the day.
Yeah.
That was the technique of
It
it.
wasn't that he didn't trust folks
No,
necessarily.
there wasn't any of that.
Yeah, okay.
It was it grew as a hands thing, and as
Yeah.
it got bigger, it stayed that
Yeah.
way. And then Tom Darton took his place.
All right.
And
Did Tom manage it in a different
and
fashion?
he of course was a manager, and being new to purchasing, he needed more reliance. You know, in other words,
Okay.
it's the old question: if you haven't done it,
Yeah.
you've got to rely on some of the people
Yeah.
that have done it. And so that was sort of a natural outgrowth.
Okay.
And then Bill Haight followed
Okay.
Tom Darton.
How did
And Bill had a lot of purchasing experience, and there wasn't too much difference in that stage,
Okay.
except it was right in toward the end of his assignment that we joined into the big group.
Okay.
And then Bill left in 71, I think it was. And that's when I was made director of purchasing.
Okay.
And
So now you had a different kind of boss, though.
right, that was when, see, Bob Cook was
Yeah,
boss
okay.
then.
So you
And
had
that, we were part of
Yeah.
this whole triad of material
Right.
activity.
He was the materials and management director or something of
And
that
then
nature.
also, as you began to get these units combined, the corporation had, with common design and interbuying, became more of a cooperative director. They didn't buy the parts,
Okay.
but you did a lot more cooperation between divisions.
In the early days, did the corporation help or hinder, so to speak, or was it hands off?
They kept their hands in on predominantly steel
Okay.
and tires.
Oh, that's interesting.
Steel and tires.
Why those two individual items?
Allocations was probably the biggest reason.
Okay. Steel was in short supply?
Oh, yeah. After the war, you know.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of corporate allocations.
Uh-huh.
And the tires were group buying. Maybe
Yeah.
that was our first group buying when you
All right.
look at it, you know.
Okay.
The big contract
Sure.
power.
Sure.
But then, of course, they weren't equipped to buy everything.
Yes.
And so they began using various divisions to
Mhm.
be responsible
Mhm.
for certain things. And it was done, you were responsible for the item that your engineering department designed.
So we paralleled then the engineering
Engineering.
force that we had. Okay.
And now I think maybe they've even crossed lines of that, I'm not
Very well,
quite sure.
yeah. How about general managers? Can you remember any of those, Van, that you can share with us, their managerial skills or techniques or whatever that you can bring back to mind?
Well, the one the closest was our Bob Cook.
Well, sure, yeah, I know.
That's recent, you know.
Yes.
I think earlier than that, I don't know that, I did work for Howard Carroll for a short time
All
before
right.
he went. And he was a man that had a good engineering background. And then the tragic Baker sequence, of
Yes.
course, it just...
Well, John Belts was there
John
somewhere.
Belts was there.
Yeah.
And,
Did those individuals like Carroll and Belts have a fairly good feel for the materials world and the purchasing world, that sort of thing?
Only in relation to the respect of what we were doing.
Okay.
They did not have a hands-on. They came
Yes.
through the engineering deal.
Yes.
And so here again, they relied heavily on those who had done and would do the
Yeah,
job.
yeah.
And
Were they the type of individuals that would listen to those recommendations that would come from your organization, or did they have different ways of doing that?
never had any problem with them not listening.
All right.
Of course, background understanding
Oh, yeah.
allowed him to respond
Yeah.
easier, you know, or with less effort.
Yeah,
He
almost
understood. He didn't
extemporaneously.
need a background explanation on
Yeah.
why we were there sometimes. You
Yeah.
know? And so from that standpoint, it's great. You get those ones.
Sure, sure.
But so far as the others, they have a record that
Yeah.
has been great.
Yeah.
Has been great. So
So you sat in a lot of staff meetings over the years,
through the
Van.
years.
Did those change any, the what I'll call the approach that people use to solve problems and do things in the staff meeting over those years?
Oh, I don't think so. They dropped the formalities a little bit.
All right.
Of, written minutes, all this type of stuff.
Okay.
And report. That was sort of dropped along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these people were pretty great doers.
Mm-hmm.
And not spending a lot of time on the formality.
Mm-hmm.
The job was out there, and that's where we went.
Yeah.
So each one has a little different technique or a little different personality, which is always get with people.
What would you say was maybe the main purpose of the staff meetings that you had?
Well, like every meeting, you got to all get together and have a communication.
So it was really a sharing of information.
Communication
right.
and a presentation in relation to what you were doing that others would be interested in.
Yeah. It was not necessarily a decision-making meeting?
There was some of that.
Okay.
Because it was done when everybody was there,
Yeah.
and the general manager was,
Yeah.
he could make a decision
Yeah.
after he heard it, and if it required it, well.
Yeah. Okay.
And those people usually knew where we were going and what they wanted. It wasn't, didn't require a lot of hemming and hawing.
Yeah, yeah.
So, it was really nice.
Yeah.
It was nice.
What do you think maybe was the most significant happening during all those years that you spent there?
Probably the first million-car year.
That million-car thing.
That sticks up to me. We could enjoy that, and that was great. I think the other thing, and that's just sort of, when you say significant, is a personal pride, company pride, or sociological pride. And I think the other part was when, really, long before the media got a hold of minority problems, General Motors was starting. And it's hard to explain, but that was a great event. I mean, if you look out, what do you do socially? Okay, so you pay your taxes and you work on community things. But I think the participation in that, and women, development of those, was probably a tremendous feeling. And you met with some successes and some not so good.
Like most things.
But in that line, I know that we had a minority supplier day, sort of patterned after, here again, General Motors had us attend one in Washington, D.C. On a national level. And coming home, everybody was sort of given a little assignment, what can you do about it? And we had two of our people, Bill Holland and Don Cassidy, and we kicked around, and we had our own on a small scale. Probably had 60 vendors come in, and we taped it, videoed it, and we had it shown. The timing is right sometimes, right before we retired. It was shown in Detroit with the then Pete Estes and Sullivan, and they came in to watch it, and they stood up and applauded for what we had accomplished, for what we were trying to do, our opposition. Yeah. And I guess that was a little pride involved too. And I did use that when we came down here. People don't know what goes on. You can't get that story out.
Yeah, that's
so. People said, well, if General Motors had done something about minorities. So we used the benchmark. We hired our first black, I think, in working for me probably at about 1960. And, when did this come a point? Well, that was pretty early.
Sure was. Long before people heard of it, hardly.
So that was your own accomplishments, I guess.
over those years too, Van, we probably had some, what I'll call problems that may stick in your mind well, I think of things like the Chevy engine schmas, the 58 air ride program, some of those kinds of things. Any insight into those kinds of things?
No, I guess the only thing you can say, when you had a problem, we were all pretty close together and pitched in and got it done.
Yeah.
And never experienced anything where somebody really went to work to pin it on somebody.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was the normal
Yeah.
responsibility type of
Yeah.
thing, but it wasn't huge efforts to get busy and
Mm-hmm.
pin it on somebody so I'm clean.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess another thing you can be grateful for, because a lot of places you can't say that. A lot of places you can't say that.
Yeah.
And there was always, get it fixed and go.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about the air ride, Jim.
Just happened to run across it in the archives the other day. Oldsmobile was what I would call reasonably successful, and probably a lot of reasons for that. But what do you think maybe were some of the outstanding reasons for our, quote, success in the marketplace and success as an organization?
As an organization, it's because we were physically close to everybody.
Okay.
And early on, you started working to those goals. Now, you can be physically close and you can have local people different than city people, but you still got to work on it.
Yeah.
And some of this was done long before we had fancy names.
Yeah.
And if you just think back of most of your supervisors and stuff, were all on the battleground,
Mm-hmm.
and they had an understanding, and that's pretty important. You talk QWL and quality centers and listening to people.
All the new...
We did a lot of those things when you didn't have names for them.
Mm-hmm.
Some people were naturally adept at it or worked at it a little bit better. And there were supervisors that didn't, too.
Well, sure.
But basically, I think maybe because of all of that,
Mm-hmm.
you got there. You got there with it. And they were well trained from some of these, having done the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a good package.
Mm-hmm.
Good product helps your sales. There's no doubt about that. And there were some innovations.
We had some pretty good products during those periods of time.
So I guess that's all part of the
Mm-hmm.
ballgame.
Did the steel buying business change much over those years?
Oh yes. That's for when you begged and wiggled to get the last ton.
Uh-huh.
And of course, we didn't buy any foreign steel.
It all came from on the States.
All were in the States until I think we bought probably just a little foreign steel starting early 70s.
Mm-hmm. What precipitated that move in that direction?
It had to become world competition.
Mm-hmm.
You start out to protect our national assets, and that's great. And I wish we could have kept doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Because now, but then eventually you're competing around the world.
Right.
And you got to make everything level. And it was a big transition to see some of these steel companies.
Mm-hmm.
I read about them now, and you wonder, how could this ever have happened?
Mm-hmm.
And it happened because there was too much cost and not enough efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Did other industries have similar kinds of problems that we were dealing with?
Some of the big tire companies have changed hands.
Yeah.
Firestone,
Yeah.
big family-controlled
Mm-hmm.
General Tire.
Yeah.
Those are the two that I think of that probably, how could it have happened to them?
Yeah.
Type of deal.
Yeah.
But Firestone now is Japanese owned
Yeah.
under Bridgestone.
Bridgestone, I think, maybe. Yeah.
So,
Did the move to plastics and those kinds of things create any kind of special happenings from your view?
well, you saw a change from the old die casting industry,
All right.
which is now very minute so far as automotive, into all the way now into plated plastics. So
Okay.
you saw a whole new industry.
Did those people that were doing die cast transition to that, or did
Some did, and some weren't as fortunate in
Went
their,
up, went
in their
up.
outlook, and they just sort of died,
Yeah, like the buggy whip makers.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I guess that's all a matter of talent, foresight.
Sure.
Some people.
Willingness to change and whatever.
And then, of course, now you're buying a lot of parts offshore. I mean, that's a coming thing that you tried to protect. But that also became the same thing. If you're going to compete around the world, somebody's got to transist back.
Yeah,
Can you transist backwards?
I would think so. You would think you could go either way.
I mean, it just became part of the game.
Did we have
Electronics industries, of course, Delco.
Yeah, that's the
Then
one.
Delco Radio,
Right.
Delco Electronics. They probably, I'm not sure if they were the first GM people that went offshore.
Yeah, but I think of things like starters and generators that traditionally we would always buy from whoever, Delco, Remy, or whoever it was, and that must have been a shock to some people.
Gradually, that became as a push to get, they had to become competitive outside.
Did some of our supplier divisions resist that sort of thing during the early days of that sort of push?
Most of them were anxious to get in and compete against the Allied divisions.
Yeah.
And then going offshore, you had a variety of, some of the larger Allied suppliers were going overseas with some of their divisions.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they brought back these things that they could do.
How did our Allied guys view all that?
Well, it's tough to take,
Yeah.
And you had a balance. You got a General Motors responsibility.
True.
And perhaps that's when the corporation got a little more involved too, because somebody has to make decisions on the overall picture, not just what's good for you, Jim. It's what is good for the corporation.
Yeah.
And they're the only ones that can know that.
Yeah.
So, but there was still a lot of heat on us to make an Allied division. That was a basic ground rule. They had to be competitive.
Yeah. Any interesting occurrences occurred during that time when you had to do some pushing and shoving, so to speak, to get things to happen?
Oh, I can't remember anything specific.
Okay.
But they were there.
Yeah, I'm sure that we must have had some real knockdown drag-outs, so to speak. Okay. Now, back up a notch, somewhere in there, you had mentioned the Chamber of Commerce, kind of in the middle there someplace. You had been very active in the chamber as an individual because of the particular position you had. You eventually became the president of the chamber?
Right.
What year was that, Van?
Well,
you remember? Don't need to, I can find it.
Mid-70s.
Okay.
Mid-70s, yeah.
What, can you remember back to your term and what kinds of things might have been going on at that juncture?
Well, it was a period of development. The first year I was active, the director retired, and we went through hiring a new man.
Was that Al Boyd?
Al Boyd retired.
All right.
And Ed Alberti came in. So we were part of that selection process.
All right.
And then that was the first year. And then the second year was sort of getting our feet on the ground with a new director and where do we want to go and what can we do. And then the third year I was president.
Okay.
And then that was a year that we said, okay, now we got a program, now we got something to throw, and we got to get more people involved. Because there was a whole group of peoples around Lansing that weren't involved.
That were not members of the organization?
So that was the year that I was there. The kickoff was to get people to participate.
All right. Okay, so you were growing in numbers.
So now as you grow in numbers, you gotta use these numbers for something. And that was started about the year after I was president.
All right.
Of having concrete programs and being strong enough to make themselves feel.
What were we doing for members during that time frame?
Okay, that's probably one of the problems of the early change.
Okay.
Really was. In other words, it was you weren't strong enough to do a whole lot.
Okay.
I mean, it had to be low key, and you didn't
Yeah.
have it. And as you got numbers, then they began to get better, more good people. It wasn't
Mhm.
enough to just a few. And see, Nan Martin brought a lot of realty people in, and there's a lot of strength there so far as wanting to do something
Yes.
for Lansing because they wanted realty.
Sure. Part of the
And,
business.
That you were able to get more people in, the hotel people and the restaurateurs and the small business groups and stuff. So they began to make themselves feel involved. During that time also was when EDC started.
Okay.
And it was sort of a parallel or in a way so far as goals with the EDC having a specific thing of developing and bringing in new business. But they were parallel.
Was that wasn't part of the chamber per se, was it? That was a separate organization.
That was a Lansing, City of Lansing.
Yeah, all right.
So.
During the selection process, when you changed from Boyd to Alberti, was it?
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of things did you folks have to do? How many people did you look at, and what did you advertise? What
Well,
did you do?
the chamber has, the U.S. Chamber has facilities for distributing information.
Yeah.
And then we advertised in several papers around Michigan.
Okay.
And we probably had 100 applicants.
Wow. Okay.
Most of them were from other chambers, either the normal thing where they wanted to come to a bigger city. They had been Michigan people and went to Ohio or someplace and come back.
But they were generally executive directors of some kind and maybe a smaller chamber.
All but one that we really ended up interviewing had been executive chambers, or executive directors of other chambers.
Okay.
And we settled on Alberti from Ohio.
What did the director, what was his task in those days?
They actually pretty much run and did it.
All right.
I mean, remember the board were all workers. They had jobs to do.
Sure.
So you couldn't devote a whole lot of time to the hands-on operation.
Yeah. You'd call Ed and say, can you do this or that or the other thing?
We even looked to them for ideas.
Okay.
And, like, hey, I know after I got out, one of the things was, what can you do to get started on a hotel project? And I think Mike Warren that was in his period, and he sort of took that on and spent a little more time on that than we could have. And it isn't to say the chamber did it, but you got to get support for it.
It's a voice.
That's a long time idea, a long time goal, so it's what you can pitch on. Ed Harden helped us tremendously as we became stronger in working with the state legislature. And
Who else was on the board at that time? Do you remember any of the other individuals you're working with?
let's see, there was Mike Warren, and I mentioned our gal, Nan Martin, Jim Anderton, Ed Harden. I'm just trying to think of some others.
Okay,
there was a big
fairly good
cross-section, yeah.
Fairly good cross-section of folks.
And
And the term was 1 year?
the president was 1 year, yes.
Was that generally the way I noticed that when we did our historical thing, it looked like most folks were 1 years.
I think so, yeah.
Did that seem to be a problem at all?
Well,
Because it's
not
such a
really,
short period of
because you
time?
worked with you had a board,
Yeah.
then you had an executive committee.
Yeah.
And that executive committee, you could be on there for 2 or 3 years before you became president.
All right.
Then you became president, and then you stayed on 1 year after as past president.
So there
first
was
past.
some overlap.
So there was a lot of overlap. And I think one of the problems is you can't devote that much time to it 2 years in a row.
Yeah. It was a fairly heavy time drain sort of
Well,
thing.
it was like probably 3 hours a week, which when you have another job,
When you got a real job.
You know,
Yeah.
and scheduling that in,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's always those extra things to do.
Sure. Oldsmobile was fairly active in the chamber during that era.
By virtue of its position in the community.
Uh-huh.
They subscribe, like you said earlier, memberships, and always somebody in there in a key spot. Which they should have, both as a contribution and as
Sure. Because
watching what was good for us too.
And they had some talent available, obviously.
So it was well used.
Yeah.
I guess,
Okay. So that was kind of
it was quite a career.
the chamber.
It was quite a career.
Okay. Any particular thing that would stick in your mind that might be of interest to people 10 or 20 or 30 years from now, that when they stand back and say, gee, is that how we did our business back in the good old days? Did this...
If I said that, my predecessors would be saying the same thing.
Yeah. Did any of over the years, we had some strikes, not only ours, but I remember in some of the industries that supplied us.
A lot of supplier strikes.
Did those things create any peculiar problems for us, Van?
Special handling, alternate suppliers,
Okay.
and restricted car productions.
It did at some time.
Lots of times.
Uh-huh.
Was not uncommon.
Okay.
And then, of course, sometimes there's actually a shutdown.
Yeah. Laying parks around and that sort of stuff? Remember doing any of that?
It grew to be a common occurrence. And so, both from helicopter, charter planes, single engine planes to big C-47s before we got through.
How in heaven's name did we ever try to keep track of the 15,000 or whatever number of parts there are in a car so we didn't get ourselves lost in the swamp?
Computers.
But we didn't have computers all of that time you were
Well,
here.
remember, we didn't have all those parts then either. You know, it was simpler.
Back when you started, it was all piece of paper, wasn't it?
A lot of it was a printout. In some cases, we'd start with a number of cars.
Yeah.
And then how much per car, and run it out on a computer or calculator. Well, it wouldn't be a computer then.
Not in that time. Yeah.
And
Yeah, must have done it either long.
adding machines,
Longhand or with one of
multiplications,
those little punch
jobs.
Yeah.
And then you'd make your handwritten releases out.
Did the computer era, did that significantly, other than people, did that significantly change our approach to things?
I think it allowed us to become more diversified. You know, we used to have 3 cars,
Right.
98, 88, and 78.
Super 88 or
Yeah.
something.
And all of them, over a lot of common parts.
Yeah.
And again, it was just this division virtually. Well, then as you began adding car lines, I don't know if the computer caused that or whether the computer allowed us to do it.
Helped us,
Jim. I think the computer allowed us to do that.
Yeah.
And so it just became a way of life.
Yeah. It was absolutely mandatory that we had one at the end, obviously.
Oh, yes.
Did the schedule guys work with you too, or were they part of the thing?
They were part of the program.
And the creation of the schedule, how many cars we were going to build, how did that kind of get formulated?
Well, again, that came in conjunction with the sales department.
All right.
Gordy Osborne was the one that was there the spell of the longest, and then Tom Smith.
Yeah.
But from there started, or maybe total cars from, marketing, corporation, business outlook, and then everybody's opinion and guess and estimate as to where it would be divided.
Okay.
And eventually get broke down. Constant reminder to remain flexible because it could change.
Well, yeah,
and it did.
Like the '74 period when the energy crunch happened.
Right.
Well, we just couldn't get it shut off, could we? Hardly.
Biff survived them all so far.
Yeah.
Interesting to his Wall Street Journal this last week. There's an article about would GM be able to withstand the potential recession of 1989.
Oh.
And I just sort of chuckled a little bit. I said, you'd think we'd never done it before.
Yeah, we've been through a jillion of them.
So the answer to that would be a quick yes.
Yeah, right.
That's great.
Okay. Well, see if there's anything else I can think of. And anything else you can think of that would be of interest to folks as time wears on.
Well, we may have done our jobs.
We may have done it. Yeah. Okay, I will shut her down now.
Well, I think it's great, Jim. I really that you
We've
are doing this.
We've had a lot of fun doing it. So.